What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be working on getting these 37s fitting on the Land Cruiser. They fit under normal driving conditions. I can drive around town, hit speed bumps, do all that good stuff. They don't really rub, but when I go off-road, they do rub. And I actually already bent in one of my front fenders, and you can see where that's been rubbing in the rear. So we'll go out there to the truck, I'll show you where it's rubbing, and we'll talk about what I'm going to do to address it. So when I bought the truck, although it had plenty of dents and scratches, actually right here, this is new. So this happened from going off-road and the tire actually hit this and ended up folding it in and chipping the paint. My first step's gonna be, I can see this fender is really tore up. It would have been nice if I can find another white one. The bolts under here are already detached and there's just a few more bolts and the whole fender is going to come off. There's some 10 millimeters that actually bolt the metal liner to the metal fender, and they're just kind of lined up like this along the edge. I'll take all those out, and then I will take our upper bolts out. Gotta take my corner light out, and then there is one more bolt right there that we'll get to. Remove all those bolts and I should be able to take the fender off, and that will allow me to cut the inner fender quite easily and quite well. Just as a point of reference for you guys, we'll go over what I have on this truck. So it's a Old Man Emu 2 to 2.5 inch lift, Delta Vehicle Systems 3L radius arms. And the L means the axle is actually shifted forward an inch to help with tire clearance on the firewall. The wheel specs are 17 by 9, 3.5 inch back spacing, and then -44 offset. And then we're running a set of 37 by 12.5 BFG KM3 mud tires. One thing I did have to remove was the cowl, and that is because there's actually a bolt right here that was hidden under it. It's just some Phillips screws across the front, your wipers, and then that just kind of pops right off. And as you can see, there's just a bunch of junk under here anyway, so it's a good opportunity to clean that all out, get all this debris out of there so it's not going down in here and clogging this all up. Both of our fenders off, we're taking a better look at what we got to work with here. Obviously you can see this is metal, and this is even part of this part of the body. And what we're going to do is actually we're going to cut, but we're going to leave some overhang because I intend to make some custom inside fender wells after this with some ABS plastic sheeting. That way I have something that I can rivet that sheeting to and make kind of a custom fender liner, since this doesn't actually clear. Here on the East Coast, as you can see, even though these liners are here, all this mud that gets up in here, and that's another reason why I end up getting a Snorkel. So this is the air intake, and if these liners weren't there, basically they're going to throw water up the fender and it would just pour right in the intake, and then, you know, you could end up hydrolocking the engine. So that's why I ended up getting the Snorkel. Excited to show you guys which one I got. I think it's gonna look pretty sweet. We're gonna go ahead and cut these out and we'll kind of proceed from there. The air saw I'm using is actually from Harbor Freight, and it works quite well. For the money, I think it was like 25 or 30 bucks. I will say if you're gonna use it with a compressor, maybe use it with a larger compressor. It needs some good pressure to really do some cutting. I'm just using a little pancake compressor, and I have to stop pretty often and let it build up pressure, otherwise it struggles to cut. Went ahead and pulled the front wheels off to make this next part a little bit easier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to end up cutting diagonally up through here because the tires actually rub right there on that little bit. And if you look at the front side here, we got part of the AC that's in the way, and this bracket bolts right here, which I want to retain. We're going to try to go diagonally up this way and cut out all this section right here, and that should give me plenty of clearance up there in the front with these tires. Here, I just used my Sawzall with the Diablo Steel Demon blade to make this diagonal cut. Real quick, I put the wheel back on just with 2 lug nuts. Wheel at full lock, and I'm just looking at how much clearance I have here. This is at resting height right now, so it's still got to come up. So I am going to have to trim some more. I think if I get rid of pretty much this inner fender liner all the way up to here, but I'll get rid of all this right here, and then it should be good, and do the same for the other side. Alrighty, I think we got enough cutting done now. You can see I cut all the way down at an angle there. We will be cutting the bumper later after I do the fenders, just so we can make it look better. And just to give you guys a real perspective on how much I cut, this is the piece that used to be there. You can see the fender liner used to have this big gap right here. You used to go from here to there. So now all that's gone. So that's a bunch more clearance than there was before. And obviously it used to rub right there. Should be good now, hopefully. And if not, I'll just have to do a little bit more clearancing. But I think for now, I'm going to take some of this Eastwood rust encapsulator that you guys saw me use on other parts of this project, and I'll just go ahead and paint all these bare metal edges, keep them from rusting up on me. Here I went ahead and removed the part of the factory airbox that I'm no longer going to need, and then went ahead and got our fenders back on. Nothing to note here really, just be careful with these 10mm bolts as they're real small and fragile and you don't want to break one off. All right, with our fenders all back on, I ended up actually getting this one attached pretty well. If you guys remember before, this thing had a tree come up through there and the fender was getting caught on the slider and it was just not lining up whatsoever. So now I'm kind of looking at it, figuring out how I want to cut this thing. Because I have the axle shifted forward, you can see how now instead of the wheel centered up with the arch back here, it's kind of up here. So I'm kind of wondering if I should maybe cut and then taper off and leave that factory edge or something close to it. And I'm also thinking that because if you look, my slider ends right here. And if I were to follow this body line right about here like I want to, then the slider is going to be kind of sticking out and it's just going to look a little funny. But if I start to cut here and then kind of lead up and make it look good like that, kind of follow the pattern of the new position of the front axle, I think that might look a little better. So I think I'm going to try that first and then we'll see how it turns out. Alrighty, took a Sharpie and kind of made a mark for something for me to follow. I know this doesn't look perfectly round right here. As I'm going around, I'm just going to kind of cut on the outside of the line there and go down. And I'm still going to end up cutting this lip off. So basically this is going to go down, this is going to continue along this edge all the way down through. As you can see here, I also marked the bumper. So I measured the angle of the bumper. It was about 55, 56 degrees the way my truck's sitting right now with the angle finder. And then I used a ruler and marked that just so it matches the angle that the ARB bumper originally was. I think it's about time to start cutting.
I think the hardest part about making this cut is just keeping the fender from flapping around everywhere. As you're cutting, it starts to vibrate the fender and it really just kind of starts to get out of hand. You kind of got to hold pieces and make sure that it's still cutting straight.
Alrighty guys, fenders are all cut. Here's a look at all the material that I actually took off. Here you can see how I tapered the arch, which created kind of a new wheel arch, a little bit more forward that matches how the Delta arms move the front axle forward. There you can see about how much of the ARB bumper I cut off, and it's, you know, pretty close to that cut on the fender. I didn't really plan for it to be exactly perfect. And then I did go through and take some of that rust encapsulator and paint all the bare metal edges of the fender. And then after that, I went through and lined it with some rubber edge trim that you see a lot of guys use whenever they're cutting their fenders and stuff like that. I just got it off Amazon. I'll have it linked in the description. Just coated that little bit so that didn't rust. But yeah, that just slips right on, goes around there. You can see why we're gonna end up doing some fender liners just so I don't get mud and all that junk all up in there. But next, actually, we're gonna move on to installing the Snorkel. So the Snorkel we're going to put on is by Radius Fabrications. They're actually an Australian company. If you guys are familiar with the show Four Wheel Drive 24/7, they run these stainless steel snorkels on their rigs and they look really awesome. So I looked them up and then lo and behold, Long Range Off-Road, they actually stock these. I ordered it from them and I had it with, I think it was within like 2 weeks. So it was actually really quick. It's all stainless steel, TIG welded, powder coated. Got a little mesh right there. Of course, they got their logo. Comes with a coupler, connects to the factory airbox. Give us some edging trim, kind of like we just used on our fender. And then of course some hose clamps. So I got the stencil out there on the truck already. Go out there and we'll start cutting the fender. If you guys have ever installed a Snorkel before, you'll know they normally come with these stencils. I just had to take a pair of scissors and cut out the cut area and then also cut off some excess. See here, line up with guard, which is the top of the fender. And then there's also another line over here that lines up with our door. Go ahead and put it up there, tape it up. And then what we're gonna do, because of the way this Snorkel is, it's kind of a funny shaped hole. As you can see, normally you're used to just drilling, you know, maybe an oval shape for a Snorkel, but because this kind of sinks into the fender and is a little more low profile, it's a little more of a complex hole. But luckily with the stencil, it's easy enough. We'll just go around with the Sharpie and we're gonna go make a line of where we're gonna want to do our cut. All right, with it all traced out, I'm gonna go ahead and peel this off, and I am gonna be gentle with it just in case for some reason I feel like I need to put this back up here. I'm not just gonna rip it. With our stencil in place, what I'm gonna do is take a step bit, drill a place where I can enter with my saw. The saw I'm gonna be using is the same air saw that I use to cut all these fenders. It's really nice because they don't eat out a lot really quickly, so it's very easy to control, and of course nimble with the small blade. Really perfect for an application like this, especially when we got a bunch of bends, weird curves, and all that stuff. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Here, I was really struggling having that small compressor. I had to keep on stopping and wait for it to build up pressure to actually make a significant cut.
With our hole all cut, we took some of the Eastwood rust preventative stuff that you've seen me use on this build earlier, line all the edges that we cut. I did actually have to cut the inner guard here, as the instructions call it. As you can see, me cutting this little bit allowed me to get a lot more clearance right there. Right now, we're figuring out where I'm gonna put my holes here. This bracket, we're gonna put some rib nuts in the pillar here, bolt this bracket to the pillar, and then this to the Snorkel, and keep it all nice and solid. After doing some trimming and some modification to the hole, and actually quite a bit of modification compared to the stencil that they gave me, finally got it sitting almost flush here. By the time there's a rib nut there, it's gonna be just about perfect. So what I did with it all mocked up is just take a Sharpie and made a mark where the bracket's gonna be sitting, so then I can move this Snorkel out of the way and mark my holes and drill those. See, I got the silicone boot on here just for the fitment. It is kind of a tight bend and kind of a tight fit. I'm still gonna put these clamps on there because this is just a test fit. But yeah, we'll take this off, get our rib nuts in there for our bracket, and then we can go ahead and do some final installation on this thing.
Something to note here that I did wrong is I had this bracket backwards. So the long side needs to bolt to the Snorkel, and then the short side is actually what I should have been measuring and putting on the truck side.
So we got the Snorkel all installed. I'm not gonna lie, I will rate this installation compared to other Snorkels to being twice as hard, just because of the weird hole. I guess just because you have to trim other things, like I had to cut some of the body way to add room. Once I got the silicone boot like on the Snorkel itself and then in the airbox, it was really hard to get these bolt holes lined back up to bolt the airbox back. Ended up getting that done. It was really tricky to get this to sit flush here. I just had to keep on going back and doing test fits and doing more trimming here and there. A lot more trimming than what the stencil said. Ended up getting everything lined up. The rib nuts are in there good. All those are silicone. These are Loctited. So everything's kind of exactly where it should be. It was just a little more of an involved process than I imagined. But yeah, we got it done. Don't let that discourage you from buying one of these though. You know, I don't mind the look of the regular Snorkels. I got like a regular plastic one on my truck, but this one just looks awesome. I think it really just kind of fits the character of the 80 really well. With our fenders all cut, our Snorkel installed, now we're moving on to bump stops. So Perry Parts actually reached out to me. They're doing some prototype 80 series bump stops, and they went ahead and sent them to me for this part of the build. So these are stock length for the front of the truck. So they're no longer than factory, but it's a higher quality bump stop. It's not going to be as much of a harsh hit whenever you do hit the bump stop. For example purposes, he sent me this one so I could show you guys. See how there's like a crosshatch pattern built into the design of the bump? As you can see, this one's been cut in half. So the little air pockets allow for it to have some squish, and it'll just make it a nice soft impact whenever I do end up hitting the bump stops up front. This is for the rear. This is not stock length. This is extended, and we are extended because I can't really cut the rear fender too much because it starts to get into the body. Once we got to the truck, I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. But basically, these are extended, and these will help keep the 37 off of my rear quarter panels. And they just bolt right in your factory place. Come with hardware. They're even labeled. You can see it says front. Super easy install, and we'll go outside and get them on there. Alrighty, so right above our rear axle here, our bump stop is going to bolt into the factory holes. So what I'm going to do is actually just put a tad and never sees on these things, just because being up in the frame, I don't want them to end up rusting on me. And we'll just go ahead and tighten those up. All right, and just as simple as that. You can see they're on there nice and tight. I already took my factory bump stops off. So if you have your factory bump stops, you're just gonna have to remove these two 12mm bolts. I did have one break off on the other side, so just be worried about that. And really be nice and easy with them, and maybe use a little bit of heat on the way out. So now these are in here and good to go, and hopefully I don't have to worry about any more clearance issues with these 37s. So the whole reason I'm trying to avoid actually cutting the rear quarter to fit the 37s is I do have a little bit of room. It's kind of hard to see, maybe just like a ½ an inch or so. We got this lip and then a ½ inch. After that, the body starts to form together right there. If I were to cut even more than that, then this is just going to be wide open space into the interior of the cab, which obviously I don't want, and I don't want to have to weld that all shut either. For now, I'm going to try to leave it factory. Hopefully it'll fit, and if not, I'll basically end up cutting this 90-degree lip off just to get a little bit more clearance, but I don't want to go any further than that. A little bit of a flex test going on here in the driveway, which is what I had. This ramp, you can see I didn't get all the way up on that. I really wasn't concerned about the front though. I think the front's going to be fine. I mainly just wanted to see the rear, and after seeing this, I now know that I will have to trim the fender a little bit. You can see, I mean, the tire is just, it's touching, like it's on the fender. But if I were to get rid of this lip, I think it'll tuck nicely. And then also, you guys can see, still got a little bit of space, like maybe an inch before those bump stops start to hit on the axle. So like I said, I have a little bit of room to play with. So I think if I just kind of cut just a tad, then we'll probably be good to go. Alright, we're gonna start with this, which I think is all we're gonna need. Just barely taking off enough to get rid of this lip. Without this lip here, I think it's just gonna tuck perfectly up there in the quarter. I'm not gonna be cutting so far that it's gonna get into the body and all that good stuff. So should be good to go. Let's get to cutting.
Because the rear quarter is comprised of two pieces of metal sandwiched together, it definitely was a little difficult to cut through this with this air saw, but it allowed me to take my time and make sure it was a nice clean cut.
Hopefully you guys will be able to see this well, but see how the panel already starts to separate? So if I were to cut even further up, that gap would just get huge. But the way it is now, see, I can still pinch the panels together, and I could tack those together, but actually that edge trim that I used on the front there, you can squeeze that on there. But I think what I'll do is I'll take some of that Eastwood rust preventative coating, I'll line this whole thing, and I may even take some Sika Flex or some caulk, shoot it all up in this gap, and then smash this on top of it, and that should weather seal it pretty well.
This is actually leftover Sika Flex from my trailer build, and the nozzle is all hardened up, so I ended up having to just kind of smear it on with my fingers. But overall, I'm really happy I did this, and I can have some peace of mind knowing that it's sealed up nice and tight.
All right, we got it back up on our flex test here. As you can see, now we're not hitting the fender at all. I can get my fingers in there, plenty of clearance, and we're actually still not on the bump stop. You can see we still got a little bit of room, but that's okay. I mean, honestly, the way it's flexed right now, there's room for it to go up, and I don't know if it's ever going to be in a situation where it's going to be stuffed harder than that. I mean, you look at it, that's pretty good and well stuffed up there. Maybe the rear springs being stiff kind of keeping it from compressing any more than that. Here's a little look at the flex on this side. Doesn't really do it justice on camera. In person, it's definitely seems like a lot more, but yeah, it turned out really good. The rear fender wells being trimmed now definitely looks a lot more proportionate to the front ones. Once again, I tried to flex the front and then I ended up crushing the ramp this time actually. But as you can see, I got heaps of room in the front. I don't think I'll have any worries about clearance up here. Next up, we are working on our front fender liners. So what I've done is actually used some cardboard and kind of created a fender liner that I shoved up in there and seemed to fit pretty well. So now I've laid it on my ABS plastic sheet, and this sheet is actually moldable with heat, and it's nice and bendable and everything like that. So I'll be able to get it up there and kind of contort it how I want. And then I'm either going to rivet it or bolt it. I haven't got that far yet. We'll go ahead and cut out what I've traced, and then we'll see how it fits.
I think this ABS plastic sheet is a great solution to fender liner. If I had more time on this part of the build, I think I would have taken my time and made it fit a whole lot better, but I was in a little bit of a rush, but still very happy with how it turned out.
All right, we got our fender liner in. As you can see, the tolerances are pretty good. There is a little bit of a gap still, so I can't expect some mud. I didn't bring them all the way forward here just because it was gonna get all floppy and stuff up here. Mainly just kind of protecting this backside and preventing that door jamb from just getting totally caked full of mud. That'll do the job. All I did was do some self-tapping screws all the way around. I was going to do rivets, but I don't like them not being removable in case they get trashed and they start hanging and rubbing the wheel. I can easily pull these self-tapping screws out on the trail and just kind of throw these things away if they get too tore up or something like that. They do feel pretty stout, as you can see, nice and solid. So even if they're getting a lot of stuff thrown at them and caked up, they shouldn't budge. The way I cut them, I made them kind of a tight fit up against the fender here, so hopefully that helps. And also the bow in it, because this stuff's flexible, having the bow in it kind of ends up making it nice and rigid, so that worked out pretty good. So that pretty much wraps up getting these 37s to fit. I didn't get a chance to put the front bump stops on. As you can see, I got this bucket, I'm draining the coolant. I'm actually about to start doing a bunch of engine maintenance. I'm on a little bit of a timeline here to get all that stuff done to have this thing ready for a trip. Overall, it wasn't too bad, just a little bit of patience. I do need to find some like glue to keep this trim on. See, it's kind of like sagging down. So some sort of glue to keep that on there is just something to keep in mind. It doesn't stay on too well. When I put this stuff on the rear, I did that Sika Flex. So this stuff's like basically glued to the fender. So that stuff's not gonna come off. But yeah, man, overall, very happy with how it turned out. I think those bump stops in the rear are gonna be good. He's sending me ones that are 1.5 inches longer. As you guys saw, I still had some room under there at full flex, so he's sending me some longer ones that will actually end up making contact about right where the tire was. So that'll work out good because it actually will compress about another inch once it actually contacts the axle. So that should land it about where I showed you guys when I was doing the flex test, and should keep me nice and clear, ready to hit some trails and not have to worry about any rubbing. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. The next video, I'm going to be doing all this engine maintenance on the Land Cruiser. As you guys can see, I got a ton of parts. If you guys have been following my IG stories, I've kind of outlined what I'm going to be putting on. Not going to be able to do a full detailed video on every part I'm putting on just because there's so many hoses and so many little things. It would be a 2-hour-long video by the time I was done with it. Pretty much, I'm just going to kind of explain what I'm doing, a lot of time lapses, and kind of reasons why I'm replacing certain things. So hopefully it's still helpful, just without maybe as much detail as you guys are used to. So once again, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.